Today, Alexis is taking the minutes. Welcome to Setting the Record Queer, a podcast where queer people talk about the pursuits and communities they love. This is Taking the Minutes #1, and it's about virtual photography in Final Fantasy XIV. Taking the Minutes is an extra episode series where your podcast hosts talk about things they love, and it's made possible by Setting the Record Queer's Patreon supporters. Thanks, patrons! My name is Alexis, my pronouns are it, its, and she, her, and I'm taking the minutes. Today, I'm going to be talking about a recent hobby I picked up that I've been having a lot of fun with. I started playing Final Fantasy XIV a good number of months ago, and it's kind of consumed all of my time since then. And among other pursuits in the game, I found that I really enjoy virtual photography. As the name implies, virtual photography is photography in virtual environments, most often video games. I'm not an expert on photography theory, and I know almost nothing about real photography, so take what I have to say on photography theory with a grain of salt. But I have spent a good number of months taking pictures in Final Fantasy XIV, so I feel like I at least know what I'm doing in that realm. What I find really interesting about virtual photography, and again, I haven't done real photography, so take this with a grain of salt, is that it has sort of a unique set of constraints and affordances placed on how you can go about taking your photographs. I also just really like taking pictures of my pretty catgirl character in the game, and that's pretty much all I do, although sometimes I take pictures of my friends' characters too. But anyways, so let's talk about these unique constraints and affordances that, or at least what I perceive as being unique about virtual photography. So the first particular constraint on virtual photography is that because you're in a digital environment in, modern gaming, you're typically running on a 1080p screen, which means compared to real life, you have a significantly lower resolution. And in most games, you have very limited control over the camera, oftentimes only centered around your character, or maybe you can target another character in a special photo mode like you can with G-Pose in Final Fantasy XIV. Through my time in virtual photography, I've come up with a number of workarounds, or at least things that help me sort of avoid this. By using the field of view slider in Final Fantasy XIV's G-Pose, you can get extra zoom, and this is sort of a twofold function that allows you to adjust exactly how much or how wide of a view you're capturing, but also the more you zoom in, the higher quality the models get. Of your character and their clothes and everything else in the scene, because again, resolution is a lot lower than with real life, and a bunch of sharp edges and pixels and polygons is really bothersome when you're trying to look at a photograph from an art standpoint. A couple other tricks that I've picked up to adapt for the lower resolution is I've learned that if I'm taking a portrait picture, you can actually use the camera angle rotate feature to take the picture sideways to take advantage of the longer width of the screen. Although framing a photo sideways is kind of hard, and I just kind of end up rotating my head sideways, but we make do. And then one other little trick I've picked up, in Final Fantasy XIV, you can have minions out. Minions are just cute little friends that follow you around. You can have a cactar and stuff like that. If you put a minion behind your character and then focus on the minion in the photo mode, you can get your camera in really close to your character really easily, which is pretty nice for framing things. So those are my workarounds for limitations on resolution and camera. The next constraint, and this is probably the most challenging one, is that because it's a video game, you have a limited amount of expressions and poses. You only really have your emotes and your character's, combat moves, whatever those may be, and you can only use some of these in certain situations. So one thing I find really fun about this is that you have to get creative. You have to try everything. When you look at an attack animation, you have to watch every frame of it to see if there's something interesting there, something you can combine with a particular face that maybe gives you something that you wouldn't have expected. from, it being an attack or whatever. Some of my favorite G poses have come from combat moves because they give you just such dynamic poses. But really, you just have to try everything, which is one of my favorite things. You just have to experiment. And the third particular constraint is that there's no realistic collisions. Like, you can pose two characters together, but they won't actually, put their arms against each other. If you're taking a picture of your character and your friend's character hugging because you ship them or whatever, just as a hypothetical example. It's definitely not something I do. If you're trying to get two characters hugging, they don't actually have collisions, so you have to make very careful use of angles and minor adjustments to what part of the emote animation you're on, to try and find a spot where there's not going to be bothersome, obvious collisions in the middle of your picture, but then also at some point you end up just kind of making compromises. So those are the three main constraints I've found with doing virtual photography in Final Fantasy XIV, but what's nice is that doing photography in a virtual environment actually gives you a number of affordances as well. So in 14, you get 3 lights that you can place from the camera mode, and you can place these anywhere, and they're invisible except for the lighting, and you can make them any brightness or any color, which is really awesome and means you could do a lot of things. You can make photos at night look like photos during the day, or what have you, place multicolored lights everywhere to create incredible visual effects. A photo of such I'm going to be talking about later when I talk about some of my favorite pieces. As well, you can freeze time infinitely, which is pretty nice. Allows you to really precisely adjust poses and stuff and don't need to worry about, someone losing their balance when you're trying to get them posing on one foot or whatever. Also, because it's a video game, you have really easy access to incredibly beautiful environments. Like, if I was a real photographer, I'd be stuck in Rochester, and there's some pretty sights in Rochester, but nothing too exciting compared to when you can, go just anywhere in a video game, especially in the environments for boss battles and stuff like that. There's a lot of really pretty animations and skies and stuff like that you can take advantage of for pictures. And fourth, and arguably most important, there's pretty catgirls. Some other thoughts I have about virtual photography fall more into the realm of, I feel like, general photography knowledge and theory. So in addition to just taking these pictures and sharing them with my friends, I've been posting them on an Instagram account I made specifically for doing this virtual photography stuff, which you can find at instagram.com/echo, EKHO_white, as in the color. So a couple things I've picked up on that have helped me make and frame my pictures better, include the rule of thirds, which, if you're not familiar, you divide your camera frame into 9 equal squares. 2 vertical lines, 2 horizontal lines, and what you want, according to the rule of thirds theory, is that the major elements of the picture line up along the lines and intersections of the rule of thirds, not in the squares, which is the opposite of what I would have figured. But I've taken advantage of that to frame some of my pictures really well. As well, I've sort of learned a fair amount about best practices with taking advantage of focus and editing. Editing as in, after the fact Instagram filtering and, brightness and contrast adjustments and stuff like that. Final Fantasy XIV gives you tools to adjust the camera focus. You can adjust the focus manually and adjust the amount of, depth blur. You can have none, you can have tons, and finding that right balance that you get that sort of subtle artistic blur that helps you focus on what really matters in the picture without making everything in the background just a boring, blurry mess has been a bit of a challenge, especially the way the focus works can be a little weird sometimes and not exactly super intuitive, but I've learned to deal with it. And in terms of editing, I don't know if I can say anything specific, but really just taking reference pictures that you think are edited well and just sort of using those, okay, what are they doing in terms of brightness and contrast and saturation, and how can I use these Instagram editing tools to make my photos look better without making them look over-edited, especially with all of the Instagram filters that can look really pretty, but really a lot. So learning how best to balance the amount of editing you do is something that I've found to be important in doing this virtual photography. And I haven't really explored starting to do editing in Photoshop or anything like that. I might at some point if I continue pursuing this, but for now I'm content to do basic editing on Instagram. It provides enough tools that I can get what I want done. So the next thing I wanted to talk about, something I made for taking pictures in Final Fantasy XIV. In Final Fantasy XIV, you can have houses. And if you have a house for your guild or your group in Final Fantasy XIV, and they're called free companies, players in the free company can have their own rooms and do whatever they want with them. So since the house at large already has group hangout spaces, I decided to take my personal room in a different direction, and I built myself a photography studio. This was really expensive with in-game money and took a little while, but I have friends to help me with this sort of thing, which I am very grateful for. So the setup I used was inspired by someone who goes by Moogle Media. It was the Moogle Media G-Post Studio. There's a link to the blog post they wrote about it in the show notes, so you can go see what inspired my setup. But they pointed out some specific items that you can use to make really, really good photography lighting. So among other things, I used specific positionable walls to give myself a nice flat color background. What's also nice is you can paint them different colors for different pictures. As well, I used a pair of basically stage lights designed to be lights as if you would use, for a theater or anything like that, but placing them in specific spots on the wall so that they shine down on where, your photography muse is standing, to give good sort of overall ambient lighting and light their back in a way that works with the picture well. Plus a pair of specific lamps that are actually relatively hard to get. You have to do a bunch of side content to unlock the ability to buy these, but luckily I had a friend who could get me a pair of these dragon lamps that you get from the Moogle Beast tribe. And what's nice about the dragon lamps is that they have a really clean white light at a pretty decent height, and I can just sort of move them around wherever's good for the picture. As well, I had to use a specific, very expensive rug to put on the ground because it's the only clean white rug that looks good for pictures. You can see a picture of the G-Post Studio in the link to my performance showcase pieces. There's a link to an Instagram post that's going to have everything there. And so some unique challenges that this has presented was learning to position everything to sort of make good use of all of this really nice lighting, because before I was pretty much just using XIV's, 3 lights in G-Pose, but now I'm up to 8, which is a lot more to use well, but I'm having a lot of fun experimenting with it. And one thing that's really nice about Final Fantasy XIV specifically is that there's sort of an unnatural foggy quality to lighting that I think makes pictures look really, really good just because of the way they do particle lighting and stuff like that. I don't know. I'm not the game developer on this podcast. So yeah, I've had a lot of fun with my G-Pose studio, and I'm really glad I decided to spend all of that in-game money and beg friends to make me stuff and make that happen. And as for what's coming in the future for me and virtual photography, I'm planning to start messing with Reshade soon. Reshade is a modding software that allows you to, as the name implies, reshade Final Fantasy XIV to look better. There's a lot of presets designed for Reshade that are specifically meant for photography that will absolutely tank your game's frame rate, but are designed to look really, really good for still images, so I'm excited to play with that. And in terms of, just to kind of stick with something that we like to do on the podcast, advice for someone who would be looking to get started in virtual photography, I would encourage you to use a new tool with every photo you take. And really pay attention to stuff like your lighting and your zoom, take full advantage of your entire screen, and be mindful of the surroundings of your photo. You can make your character look great, but if there's a bunch of random stuff in the background, it's going to be really distracting. And I would recommend checking out Final Fantasy XIV Instagram. There's a thriving community, and a lot of people make really, really pretty pictures that I like to use as reference for how to make my pictures look good. Cool. So with that, let's move on to my little performance showcase here. I'm going to talk a little bit about a few of my favorite pictures that I've ever taken. I'm going to do this rather quickly. You can look at the pictures in the show notes. There will be a link to an Instagram post that's going to have all of them in a row because, again, I wanted to show the whole process, which includes sort of making this post. This first picture is a picture of my character, Echo, And my friend's character, Salia, it's snowing outside, and Echo looks like she's shivering, and my friend's character is hugging her. So I was really proud of this photo when I took it, and I still am, because this was something where I really had to take advantage of creativity to get the poses right. There's no shiver emote. Well, actually, I think there is, but I don't have it. That's actually the shocked emote on a specific frame, plus using a specific face, because you can set the face separately to give the effect of, like, I'm cold and shivering and huddling up. And then I had to position my friend's character really, really specifically to get the, like, comfy arm around hug. That was not easy, let me tell you. It took like 10 minutes. But what I think I would do differently next time is pay more attention to how I framed the rest of the picture. I would have taken better advantage of the space of the frame and probably gotten the other characters in the background out of the way, including like the floating orb and the person in yellow in the background. Next, I have a set of 2 photos that I took in the city of Ul'dah. Ul'dah is a really pretty city, and both of these photos demonstrate other unique things that I was proud of. This first photo is just kind of Echo, my character, standing, looking smiley and pretty, and this is one of my favorite photos. What actually happened here was I honestly, in my estimation, overlit the photo. If you look at the top of Echo's head, it's like overwhelmingly white. But honestly, I think it has a really natural, like, summer sunlight look to it. And this whole photo set was supposed to be like summer in Ul'dah, and I think it turned out really, really well. And the second photo of Echo kind of sitting in front of the sky, I think was just an example of good framing. And this was sort of by accident. I just kind of sat in a spot and moved the camera around and was like, oh, wow, the sky's really pretty here. And yeah, I spent a little while framing it, and I think this shot looks really, really good with the way the buildings kind of shape the background, and with like the really pretty yellow clouds. The next photo with Echo and the same character from earlier posing together, this is an example of what I can do with my G-Pose studio. If you look, the lighting is like really clean and even and a lot better than some of the other pictures. I'm not going to belabor the point here, but I'm really happy with how photos from the G-Pose studio look. They look so clean and frankly professional because it's a photography studio. And then finally, and this is my favorite photo that I've ever taken. So this picture is Echo sort of posing out of frame. She's holding up her cane and doing like a magical cast. But what's really striking about this photo is the lighting, and this was sort of an accident. So this was a whole photo set I did themed around darkness and like evil, and it was sort of inspired by the new expansion Shadowbringers that was not out at the time, but now is. And so for this, I played a lot with dramatic colored lighting. And what I ended up doing here was using each of the 3 lights, one bright red, one bright blue, and one bright green, all from different angles to create this like cascading rainbow effect. And I'm just so proud of how this photo turned out with, you know, just the streak of green along Echo's face and the hints of blue along the collar of the robes, and the way Echo's eyes just look like completely paled out by the light. And just the background like magical effects and everything. This is my favorite photo that I've ever taken. And frankly, a lot of this looks so good by chance, but I'm really happy about it. And the final element of all of this, again, since you're looking at this on Instagram, is actually making the post. So this is something that I think is important to talk about because in addition to making and posting these photographs, I also have sort of a brand for them. You know, the Instagram account isn't my account. It isn't Alexis's account. It's Echo's account. And all of the captions are in character and sort of world building around the realm of Eorzea and everything. And I've been having a lot of fun with role-playing in Final Fantasy XIV, so that sort of ties in here. And this is where role-playing and photography intersect. But it's just sort of the presentation of the post and then the specific choice of hashtags to sort of spread the post. I learned an interesting lesson about Instagram at some point where you want to go with like the second and third most popular hashtag of a subject. Because if you go with the big popular one, no one's going to see your post. But if you go with the second and third one that maybe only have a couple hundred posts, less people are looking there, but they're far more likely to see your post. So instead of hashtag FFXIVGpose, I like to go with hashtag FFXIVGposers, for example, just on the off chance that more people are going to be able to see what I post. But yeah, that's pretty much everything I have to say about virtual photography on this Taking the Minutes. I hope you enjoyed this very first Taking the Minutes. Look forward next month to Kaylee talking about something. I'm not sure what, but whatever it is, it'll be great. With that, it's time to say goodbye. So if you'd like to find my G-Pose photography content, you can do so at instagram.com/echo, EKHO_white, as in the color. And if you want to find me on Twitter, you can do so at doublegearsys, as in system. If you enjoy this podcast, maybe consider supporting us on Patreon. These Taking the Minutes episodes are made possible by our patrons. And you can find our Patreon at patreon.com/settingtherecordqueer. Otherwise, if you liked this podcast, subscribe or leave a review on your podcast platform, tell a friend, recommend us on social media. You can find us on Twitter at STRQueercast, via email settingtherecordqueer@gmail.com, or come hang out in our Setting the Record Queer community Discord at bit.ly/STRQcord. While you're there, you can ask questions for us or for our guests, or give us feedback. Maybe you have a good idea for who or what could be on this podcast, or what we could discuss on Taking the Minutes. Maybe you think you should be on this podcast. Let us know. The art for this podcast was drawn by Cubotic. That's at QBTIC on Twitter, or Cobot, QOBOT.tumblr.com. The theme music for this podcast, including the special theme that we're using for these Taking the Minutes episodes, was made by Thrill Me Music, and you can find more information about their work at thrillmemusic.squarespace.com. And our next full episode next week is going to be a crossover with the podcast Dungeons and Queers. So thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this first Taking the Minutes, and I'll see you in a week.